It's probably better to let folks, whenever something happens to them, to give a testimony of it, them personally. But just to let you know some of the things that God's been doing through some of the people here at First Newark Baptist Church. Some of you know that Miss Sue Clanton, she lost hearing in her left ear. And how devastating that was. And so she went to the doctor on a couple weeks ago on a Monday, and in Tallahassee, the specialist, and the doctor said, well, you're not going to get your hearing back, but here's some drops, and come back in a few days, and we'll check it out again. But you're going to be limited in your hearing. Well, I think about that following Wednesday morning, Jimmy went to one of his men's gatherings or men's meeting that he goes to every week at the YMCA, and mentioned she needed prayer. And one of the guys just said, well, let's just pray for her right now. And so they lifted up Sue in prayer, and when Jimmy got home, he said she was standing at the back door. She said, guess what? I can hear. I can hear. God answered that prayer. Miss Millie Parker that was telling me today that last Sunday night, after that concert that we had, that she was sitting back there, and the Lord just said, you need to go up and let Steve pray with you. You need to go. And she was hurting real bad. She said, walk or crawl, you got to get there. And so she came, and I prayed, and we just agreed together, and she said, I got back, and I've been fine. I haven't been in pain since. It's just, I'm just saying all that stuff to just say that God is moving. God is moving. He does move. It's just a matter, do we have the faith? Do we have the faith to believe? Do we have the faith to hang on? And sometimes it can be very, very, very frustrating. I think about over the past several months, a year, where Miles is concerned. There have been some times that we'd go to court, or Meredith and Ryan would go to court, and I remember one particular day she'd been to court, and she came out and she called me. She was crying, and it didn't go the way she wanted it to go. We just really set to praying, and God honored those prayers. And we've seen pretty quick answers on the prayers that I've talked about tonight. But that's not always the way it happens, is it? Look, if you will, at verse number 11 of Hebrews chapter 11. And it says, by faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. I'm talking to you tonight about the fight of faith. The fight of faith. As I just mentioned, there's sometimes that we pray and we receive immediate answers. But it's not always that way. Sometimes those prayers must be offered continually. We must seek and ask and knock. And all of those are in the tense, which indicate you got to keep on doing it. Keep on doing it. And it is very easy when you're preaching a series like I've been preaching over the past several weeks to look at all these great heroes of the faith and get all excited about how God used them and God blessed them. But it's also important to remember that we're just getting small snippets of their life. The things that happened to them happened over a period of time. It just didn't happen overnight. It was a process. in which they had to learn to trust the Lord. Now, as I say, Abraham and Sarah made it into the hall of faith. I guess you could say Abraham as a hero of the faith, Sarah as a heroine of the faith. But they made it into the hall of faith. But understand this, their faith at times was very, very shaky. It really was. See, there is no such thing as a perfect person, and there really is no such thing as a perfect faith from any person. There is a perfect object of our faith, but there is no such thing as a perfect faith. Abraham didn't have it. Sarah didn't have it. Moses didn't have it. Noah didn't have it. In fact, if you ever just stop and think about the characters in the Bible, there really were some characters. And I mean, you just look at some of them and you think, my word, how could God ever use, how in the world could he have been so blinded, or to use our word today, stupid, But yet at times they could be. God had called Abraham, for example, to go to the land of promise. And that's where he went. He followed. We talked about that this morning. And he gets there and he settles down. And not long after he gets there, he builds altars on 2 separate occasions. So he's a worshiper of God. But guess what? A famine in the land happens. And so he goes to Egypt. And on his way down to Egypt, before they get there, he looks at Sarah and he says, "You are a beautiful woman. Look here. When we get down there, you tell them you're my sister. Don't tell them you're my wife. Because if they find out you're my wife, they're going to kill me so they can have you." And that's exactly what they did. And of course, Pharaoh and the folks were made aware of this. A plague happened, and he went to Abraham and asked for an explanation. He said, "Yeah, I lied to you. She is my wife." He had little faith, no faith in that particular case. You think he would have learned his lesson, but over in Genesis chapter 20, again, he lied to Abimelech, the king of Gerar. Said, "She's my sister." And a plague was brought upon those folks during that time. And Abimelech actually had a dream where the Lord spoke to him and said, "Don't you touch that woman. She's somebody else's wife." And he wakes up and he's like, "Lord, I didn't know. I'm innocent in this. I really did not know." And he didn't. Abraham lied. He absolutely lied 2 different times. So his faith was not perfect. And yours and mine won't be perfect all the time. In the series that I'm preaching, I don't want to give the impression that that's what I believe, because I understand there is a fight of faith. And every one of us, we deal with it at some point in time. What are some things that cause us to have that fight of faith? Well, first of all, I would say when our circumstances seem impossible. When they seem impossible. Now, the Bible tells us here, and we of course know from the book of Genesis, the same truth. But here in the book of Hebrews, the writer says, "She received strength," that is Sarah, "and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised." And not only that, Abraham was considered, as man conceives time, to be too old to be a father. And that's what he said there in verse 12. "And him as good as dead." I like the way Phillips translates that particular phrase. He says, as a potential father, he was already considered dead. There was just no way for him to be a father. Now, when you read the story back over in Genesis, you never get the impression that Sarah was a woman of faith. But according to the writer here in Hebrews, she was. She considered him who promised to be faithful, even though she struggled with her faith. Somewhere in there, Sarah came to the place of faith. When was that? I'm not exactly sure. It could have been during that period of time when God spoke to Abraham and said, "You're going to have a son." And Sarah was in the tent and she heard this conversation. And you know what she did? She laughed. And God says, "Why is Sarah laughing?" She said, "I didn't laugh. I didn't laugh." He said, "Oh, yeah, but you did laugh. I heard you." Is anything too hard for the Lord? That was the question that he asked her. Perhaps it was there. I don't know. Maybe that was her convicting moment. But somewhere through this, she developed the faith to believe that God was able to do what he said he was going to do, even though it was a struggle and even though the situation seemed impossible. Folks, if it's possible, you don't need faith. If you can fix it, you don't need faith. If I can work it out, I don't need faith. But God's going to put us in those circumstances, in those situations where all we can do is trust him. Kind of goes back to what the writer of Hebrews said back in chapter 10 and verse 23. He said, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." He really is. See, at any other time, at any other moment in their life, when they were younger and they conceived, they could have taken credit. They could have taken credit. But this way, only God could take the credit, because Isaac was to be the child of the promise. And so God did wait until the circumstances were impossible for men. And sometimes you run across people that almost have this attitude. You know, I've just stopped praying about that a long time ago. I've just stopped. I've just stopped. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't stop praying. I know your circumstance seems impossible. I know it seems like a huge, huge, huge impossibility. But see, that's when God likes to work, when nothing else will. To bring us to that place of faith. But whenever we are there and we're praying for those family members, and we're praying and we're praying and we're praying and praying and we're not seeing anything happen, I understand it. I understand completely. The fight of faith is real. But God's got you right where he wants you. He got you right where he needs you to be, so that he can work in your situation. But you must believe. You must, and I must, somehow, some way, be able to have that grain of mustard seed-sized faith. To believe for the impossible. We must. Another reason why we enter into that fight of faith is this. Because time just seems to drag on. Now, I've already alluded to this just a little bit, but we get into that fight of faith when time just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. 25 years they waited for their son. 25 years. Honestly, tonight, will you pray about something 25 years? Are we willing to pray daily? 25 years. Until God moves. 25 years. Or would we have given up? It's just not God's will. It's just not going to happen. I told you about Adoniram Judson last week, who went to Burma. Maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, I don't know, but in recent weeks I told you about him who left and went to Burma and suffered greatly there because of his call to the mission field there. Do you know that Adoniram Judson went there to Burma, did not speak the language, and worked for 7 years before he saw his first convert? 7 years. And even after about 10 or 12 years, he only had 2 or 3 or 4. But all these years later, if you go to Burma, you will find multitudes of churches and multitudes of Baptists as a direct result of his ministry there in Burma. Are we really willing to stick it out when the going gets tough? Are we willing to hang in there and keep praying, believing that our labor is not in vain? It is a fight. It is a fight. I will grant you, it is a fight. I personally, y'all know I like to be candid with you. I don't like to try to hide anything. There have been, down through the years, there have been many times on Sunday night between the church and the house. I said, I've had it. I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I can't quit. God won't let me quit. And he's not worried about my threats. It didn't bother him one bit. But I'm just saying, I understand that when you continue day after day after day and week after week after week and Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and you don't seem to be seeing anything happen, yeah. People ask me sometimes, do you ever get discouraged? Well, would you? You know, it's been funny, you know, down through the years, people would leave the church that were friends of mine. They would go somewhere else, and people say, preacher, don't take it personally. And I said, you try it. You try it. You let it happen. Somebody picks up and leaves. They don't give you an explanation. All you've done is preach the word, tried to help them. They pick up. Now, I do better these days than I used to. I want you to know God has given me some victory over that, for which I'm grateful. John the Baptist had this kind of experience. All he did was preach the word. I mean, he preached it hard. He preached it boldly. He preached against the king, and it got him arrested. Even Jesus himself said about John the Baptist, among women, Among those born among women, there's not a greater that has arisen than John the Baptist. But yet John the Baptist thrown in prison, and scholars tell us that he was in there probably about a year, maybe a little more than a year. And he finally sent some of his disciples to Jesus and say, "Are you the coming one, or should we expect and look for somebody else?" And what the Bible says is that Jesus at that time turned around and he began to heal people. And then when he was finished, he turned around and looked at John's disciples and says, "Now go tell John what you've just seen and heard. And blessed is he who is not offended by me." But we can understand that, can't we? I mean, Herod's living luxuriously in the palace while John's languishing in the prison. And the reason he's there is he was doing the will of God. He was preaching the truth, and he was thrown into prison. And by the way, we don't have any record anywhere in the Bible where Jesus ever went to see John, ever sent him a letter, or ever even asked about him. And yet day after day after day after day, he languished. Yeah. John had a fight of faith. But it all worked out for John, didn't it? Well, after he got his head chopped off, it did. We have these dungeon experiences like John did, and it causes us to doubt. We just don't see what God's doing. You see, I believe there's a difference in doubt and unbelief. I believe that doubt is when you just don't understand, when you can't see clearly what God's doing. And it's honest. Lord, I just don't understand here. I can't see. Unbelief is when we just choose to believe. We're just not going to believe. I'm not going to trust. And I think John was just going through a time of great doubt. He was having the fight of faith. And then the last thing I'll share with you is this. The fight of faith. Why do we fight in our faith? And let's just there's nobody here but us and the Lord, okay? So let's just be honest about it. We struggle in the faith when we personally cannot fix it ourselves. We want to fix it. We're fixers, particularly men. That may be why more often than not men are not the prayer warriors that women are. Because we want to fix it. Somebody comes to me, and I'll be candid. People come to me for counseling sometimes, and I'm you do this and you'll be good to go. And it doesn't work that way. And so many times men, they'll try 2 or 3 things and it doesn't work and they just give up. Men, we just want to put people in their place. Abraham and Sarah tried to fix the problem. But all they did was complicate matters. Because Sarah says, go to Hagar, have a child by her. He goes to Hagar, he impregnates her, she has a child named Ishmael, and the world hasn't been the same since. Why? Because they tried to fix it themselves. And you cannot do that. But when we try to do that, it's just simply because we're fighting with our faith. God needs a little assistance. Moses tried to help. When he sees a Hebrew brother being beaten one day, he goes out and he kills the Egyptian. And the writer, or excuse me, not the writer, but Stephen, in that great sermon that he preached there in Acts chapter 7, he says this: Moses, supposing that the people would understand that God was going to deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. Yeah, he was going to use Moses to deliver the people, but God's way, not Moses' way. He got in the way. And spent 40 years on the backside of the desert. Peter got in the way. He's trying to get in the way, and Jesus just even looked at him and said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Peter's trying to save Jesus, and what does he do? He pulls out somebody's sword and cuts somebody's ear off because he's trying to help. And all he's doing is making matters worse. You know why? Because he's not doing what Jesus said to do, and that is to watch and pray. But it infuriates us when people won't take our advice. It infuriates us when people won't listen to us. After all, I've been there, you've not. Listen to me. And there is a place for wisdom from other people. I'm not saying there's not. But we need to be discerning enough to know when it's time for us to open our mouth and when it's time for us to close our mouth and trust the Lord. When Job's friends came to see him, they did the best thing they could do for Job for a solid week. They did not open their mouth and say a word. It's when they started talking. That's where the problem came in. They just went and they were just a friend. They were just there. They stayed quiet. And really all they should have done was just let Job share his feelings. Just let him mourn. Just let him pour out. But no, they've got to start being philosophers and theologians, which they weren't. And by the way, God told them, "I'll forgive you." When it was all over with, he said, I'll forgive you. But not until Job prays for you. Job had to pray for those guys before God would overlook. Because they had presumed to speak for God. God could handle Job. God didn't need their help. There's just some people that always have the answer. Or they think they do. They just always know how to fix this. They know how to fix that. You got an experience, a difficulty that you're experiencing. They've experienced it, even something worse. And if, hey, you need to do like I do. Or you need to do this, or you need to do that. And that just takes God completely out of the mix. Sometimes we just need to be quiet and let those people mourn. Sometimes we need to just let people go through what they're going through, intercede for them, and let God move and stop trying to be sovereigns ourselves. And that's why I say sometimes when somebody's on the altar and they're crying and they're weeping, sometimes the best thing for you to do, leave them alone. Let them weep. Let them cry. Don't put your hand on the ark. Keep it off. Don't try to steady it. Don't try to make it better. Let God deal with them. Because more than likely they've tried to fix it themselves and they've gotten to the point where they can't fix it anymore and they're broken before God. But if we come along, oh, honey, it's going to be all right. Oh, honey, you're such this, you're such, oh, bless your heart. You know what? The most we should say is something like that is, you know what? I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. Does that seem kind of cruel? I guess in a sense it kind of does. But we can't fix their problem. But we can pray. I remember whenever I was at the Baptist College of Florida, a young man across the street from where we lived, I think he was, 32, 33 years old, something like that. He's about my age. He died with cancer. And I came home that morning, and they had announced that we all knew he was sick. And I'll tell you, he lived just right across the way. Wife and I think 2 kids. So I got home, and me and Angela and 2 other couples went across there to see his wife. And we kind of sat there in awkward silence there for just a few minutes. And one of the ladies, she just started spewing out, you know, God's in control, and we just have to trust God, and it's all this kind of stuff, and just being a theologian. And then finally she says, I need to go back because they hadn't come remove the body yet. She says, I'm going to go back here. We all went back. And then this girl kind of scolded some of us, you young theologians, y'all just sat there and didn't say a word. And I'm thinking to myself, there was nothing to say except I'm sorry. The woman just lost her husband. She didn't need a theology lesson. She didn't need a professor. She just needed folks to be there to cry with her and to let her know that we were praying for her. That wasn't the time for that. Now, I realize that there are times when God can give people a word of wisdom during situations. I understand that. But I don't believe we need to open our mouth and try to help somebody out until we know for certain that God has led us to that place. Because there's just certain things we can't change. And so you would say, okay, preacher, I'm in the fight of faith. What do I do? It's going to seem kind of contradictory, but you just got to continue having the faith, whether it's small or whether it's medium or whether it's large. You just got to keep trusting. You got to keep trusting that God knows best. Folks, I'm not going to say, I can't stand up here and again give you A, B, C, D. I can't do that. I know that we want those kind of answers, but you can't always get those things. I don't understand why some things happen. I don't understand why He has not answered your prayer yet. I don't. And I understand the struggle that you go through. You just have to trust that God knows what's best. Shall not the judge of the earth do what's right? Yeah. He will. If we trust Him. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. I was talking with someone the other day, and they were asking a question as a certain situation was going on in their church. And some people were opposing them, kind of standing up against them. And they said, what am I supposed to do in that situation? When people, friends that you love, that you've been through the thick of this, begin to oppose you, what do you do? And I said this very same thing to them that I'm saying to you tonight. When those friends that you love oppose you and turn around and walk out on you, it's going to hurt. There's nothing you can do about that. You love people. They've been your friends. When they walk out, There is no balm in which you can rub on your body or you can take that will keep that from stinging and hurting. It's just not. But I said, do you believe that you're doing the right thing? Do you believe you're following God? Yes, I do. I said, well, that may be all you have to hold on to for some time. But you know what? That's enough. That's why they call it faith. And that's why I call it the fight of faith. But sometimes it's just not easy. And again, I don't want to present this study in such a way that I'm saying, if you just be like these people, it's all going to work out. Because as we see, as we go through the rest of this, it didn't always work out the way everybody thought it was going to work. It didn't work out that way for John. It didn't work out that way for James, the brother of John. He also had his head cut off too. Peter didn't, but James did. I believe the church was praying for James the way they were praying for Peter. I really believe that. I believe they were filled with the Spirit and they were praying for James. So why did he get his head chopped off? The sovereignty of God. God's in control, not us. Fight. It's a fight. Bless God, it's a fixed fight, though, because one day we are going to be victorious. Father, in the name of Jesus, thank you so much for giving us your word so that we can learn through the bumps and the bruises, through the warts and all of these people in the Bible. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.